bad, we don't have time to focus on something like this, something that's like this kind of science fiction. And that's a completely justifiable thing to say. I mean, there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, you know, Darfur, for example. But you could have said the exact same thing back in, say, 1942, where there was lots of bad things going on then, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't have, if we'd had the chance, launched a discussion about atomic weapons back then. And unlike with atomic weapons, robotics isn't being worked on in secret desert labs that no one knows about. It's in our face. It's being worked on in, you know, suburban factories we all know about. We can see the video clips of it. The Human Rights Watch visit was sort of interesting but both funny, because while I was there, two of their lead people got in an argument over whether the Geneva Conventions were the best guideline or the Star Trek Prime Directive. And it kind of points to that we're grasping at straws right now when it comes to regulating these machines. And this is, again, as you pointed out, this isn't science fiction. We have 12,000 of them on the ground right now.
What happens if a robot commits a massacre?
It's a great question. You know, who do you hold responsible? Do you hold responsible the human operator? Do you hold responsible the commander who authorized them there? Do you hold responsible the software engineer who wrote it wrong? And how do you hold them accountable? We don't have good answers. And what was funny is one person that I interviewed was a Pentagon robotics scientist. And he said, you know what, you're wrong. There's no social or ethical or legal dimensions with robotics and war that we have to figure out. He said, that is, unless the machine kills the wrong person repeatedly. Quote, then it's just a product recall issue. That isn't the way I think we should be looking at the social, ethical, and legal dimensions of all of this. And that's why we need to launch a discussion about it. Otherwise, we're going to make the very same mistake that a past generation did with atomic bombs, you know, not talking about them until Pandora's box is already opened.
P.W.Singer, who makes these drones? What are the corporations involved?
It is a wide industry that's growing, and it includes both the large traditional defense contractors, and not just in the U.S. There's 43 other countries working on military robotics right now. But it also includes companies that people may think of in a different way. The book opens with a visit to iRobot. iRobot is it's named after the Isaac Asimov novel and the Will Smith movie, and they make the PackBot, which is one of the most popular robots in Iraq. It's about the size of a lawnmower and goes out and diffuses bombs, and now it's being armed. But iRobot also makes the Roomba, the robot vacuum cleaner, and so I joke it's one of the few companies in the world that sells both to the Pentagon and also to linens and things.
Who else?
Oh,
what other companies?
Well, right down the road from iRobot is a company called Foster Miller. And Foster Miller is interesting because just like it was launched by 3 MIT engineers. Now, Foster Miller is a fascinating company because iRobot started out in robotics and moved into the defense world. Foster Miller is a defense company that moved into the robotics world, and it's actually a subsidiary of Kinetic, which is also linked to, the company that everybody loves to speculate about, the Carlyle Group.
Say more about the Carlyle Group.
Oh, your listeners are probably more familiar with the Carlyle Group than I am. It's one of the large investment firms based in D.C. that has sort of a who's who of people on its board, and it's the company that conspiracy theorists love to hate.
P.W.Singer, you write about, in a previous book, Corporate Warriors, you write about mercenaries. Mm-hmm. Do you see a link between mercenaries and robots having to do with deniability, not being included in the body count, and other issues? That's
a really great question. And a lot of people ask, how did you first did a book on private contractors, then a book on child soldiers, and now one on robots. What's the thread that links these? And there's two. One is that the sands are shifting underneath us in warfare, and we're in denial about it. We have an assumption of who fights wars, and it's usually a man in a uniform, and that means, oh, well, he's part of a military, and he must be fighting on behalf of a government, and it must be politics and patriotism. But look at, for example, the rise of the private military industry. That is someone who's fighting not on behalf of a government, but a private corporation. Profit motive is involved. child soldiers, another breakdown. 10% of the combatants in the world today are children. You know, war is not an adult game anymore. And then with robotics, it's sort of the ultimate breakdown of humankind's 5,000-year-old monopoly on war. But the second thing, as you raised, is an important point, that the use of contractors as well as the movement towards machines is, in a sense, a sort of outsourcing of responsibility and outsourcing of risk, trying to avoid some of the political costs that go to war. You know, I'm often asked, well, does this save us money? Well, that's not the right question on either the contractor issue nor the digital issue. We aren't using these systems because simply they save money. It's because they allow us to avoid certain political costs. Are
these robotic technologies available to the mercenary companies like Blackwater?
Yeah, there's a section in the book, I call it Soldiers of Fortran, after the old software program Fortran. And there's a great story in it which actually encapsulates some of the weird ways this is going, where a group of college students fundraised money to do something about Darfur. And they ended up actually raising about $500,000. It went well beyond their wildest dreams. And so then they explored whether they could hire their own private military company. And they were called, you know, sent messages out via email, and a number of private military companies called them back to their dorm room, and one of them actually offered to lease them some drones and to use in Darfur. And the kids are talking about this. They didn't imagine it would take off like this, but it did. Now, fortunately, some other people spoke with them and said, hey, this is really not the best use of the money that you fundraised. But it points to how these systems, they're not just accessible to militaries. As you noted, they're being used by DHS, by police agencies, and of course, many of them use commercial technology. For $1,000, you could do it yourself. You can build the version of a Raven drone. And so, well, it's a little more complex than we can go into on the show, but basically there's a do-it-yourself kit for building very similar to a Raven drone. And the point here is that you have...
And the drone shoots people.
That drone isn't armed. It's the ability to sort of toss it in the air, and it could go off and a mile away show you what's on the other side of that hill. Now, of course, you could probably jury-rig it yourself to do bad things. And what I'm getting at is that just as software has gone open source, so has warfare. And these systems are not something that requires a massive industrial complex to build, like an aircraft carrier would, or like a atomic weapon would. They use commercial technology, and so that means they can be